How does a continent that was once considered a global backwater become the engine of the entire world economy? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unravel that exact puzzle. And the answer, you'll see, is a pretty surprising story of unexpected connections, catastrophic shocks, and just some incredible luck. Okay, let's start with this really powerful and honestly provocative quote from the historian Henri Pirenne. He's connecting two figures who seem like they're worlds apart, right? The Prophet Muhammad and Charlemagne, the so-called father of Europe. What could he possibly mean by that? Well, this one sentence really sets the stage for the whole mystery we're about to dig into. And that brings us to our central question. How did a continent that was, for centuries, really on the fringes of civilization, totally transform itself into the driving force of globalization and industry? The answer, you'll find, isn't some simple story of internal genius. Oh no, it's a story of these crazy connections, devastating shocks, and massive, massive windfalls. So, to really understand Europe's incredible rise, first we need to appreciate just how far behind it was. Let's set the scene and travel back in time to the world around the year 1000 AD. This right here gives you a powerful sense of scale. I mean, it's not even close. While these great empires in Byzantium and the Islamic world were building magnificent cities, these buzzing centers of learning and culture, Western Europe was, this fragmented landscape of tiny towns and rural manors. By pretty much any measure, it was way out on the margins of the civilized world. So how in the world did things change? Well, the answer starts with that quote from Pirenne. It sparked this really fascinating debate about Europe's relationship with the booming Islamic world. A debate that ended up producing two completely opposite theories. Okay, so this was Pirenne's big idea. He argued that the expansion of Islam basically created a blockade across the Mediterranean. It severed Europe from all the rich trade of the East, forcing it to turn inward. In his view, this isolation is what created the land-based, feudal society of Charlemagne. Europe was cut off, and because of that, it became poor and totally self-reliant. And he had evidence to back it up. What historians now call the four disappearances. Suddenly, these key items, which had been super common in Roman times, just vanished from Western Europe. Papyrus from Egypt? Gone. It was replaced by super expensive parchment. Eastern silks? They gave way to plain Flemish wool. Spices disappeared from the kitchens, and gold coins were replaced by little silver pennies. To Pirenne, this was a clear sign of a total economic quarantine. But then, another historian, Sture Bolin, came along and turned this entire theory completely on its head. Where Pirenne saw a blockade, Bolin saw a boom. He argued that the Islamic world's prosperity didn't isolate Europe at all. It created a massive demand that actually pulled northern goods into a whole new trade network. Europe wasn't getting poorer. It was being secretly enriched by a river of silver. This hidden trade route was the key. You see, the wealthy Islamic caliphate wanted things like furs and slaves from the far north, and the middlemen were the Vikings, of all people. They sailed down the rivers in Russia, traded their goods, and came back with a fortune in Arab silver. Then, they'd take that silver and use it to buy swords and other goods in Western Europe. So Charlemagne's empire wasn't a product of isolation at all. It was being fueled by the Islamic world's economy, with the Vikings acting as the secret transmission belt. Now, this idea of Europe being shaped by these distant forces, it only gets bigger. In the 13th century, an even more transformative connection was forged, this time stretching across the entire Eurasian continent. Look, the Mongol conquests were brutal, no doubt about it, but they created something the world had never seen before or since, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first time ever, a single political power controlled the entire land route from China all the way to the Near East. The roads became safer than they'd ever been, creating a kind of superhighway for goods, people, and, most importantly, ideas. And this is where Europe gets incredibly lucky. It got all the benefits of this new global connection as what you might call an externality, without having to suffer direct Mongol rule. China was way more technologically advanced, and these key innovations just flowed westward. I mean, think about the impact of these three. The compass, which made the age of exploration possible, gunpowder, which revolutionized warfare, and movable type, which would spread knowledge like wildfire. Europe basically absorbed all of this game-changing tech without paying the price of conquest. But these new global connections were a double-edged sword. They didn't just bring goods and ideas, they also brought devastation. And these shocks would, paradoxically, set the stage for Europe's next great leap forward. So this new unified globe created what you could call a microbian common market. The Black Death, which likely started in Asia, traveled right along those Mongol trade routes. It reached a Genoese trading post on the Black Sea, and from there, it was just one ship ride away from devastating Europe. The scale of the catastrophe it's just hard to comprehend. 25 million people dead in just a few years. But here's the paradox. For those who survived, the Black Death created a kind of economic windfall. I mean, with a third of the workforce gone, labor became incredibly scarce and valuable. The land-to-labor ratio just shot up, causing real wages for workers to skyrocket, in some places by 75%. At the same time, the power of the old landowning lords just collapsed. It was a demographic disaster that totally rewired Europe's economy. And just as Europe was recovering, bam, another major shock hits. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople. The city's legendary walls, which had protected it for 1,000 years, were finally breached. This was way more than a symbolic defeat. It literally slammed the door on the old land routes to Asia. The cost of spices and silks went through the roof. So you have this increasingly dynamic and restless Europe now cut off from the east, and it was forced to look for another way. It had to look to the sea. And what they found on the other side of that sea would trigger the single greatest resource boom in human history, changing the destiny of the entire planet. The sheer scale of this discovery is just hard to overstate. Europe in 1500 was about 3.75 million square miles. The New World suddenly opened up a frontier of nearly 20 million square miles. This was an ecological windfall of unimaginable proportions. That's like a fivefold increase in available land and resources overnight. And it wasn't just empty land. It was a treasure chest. The great silver mines of Potosí in what's now Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico started pumping just staggering amounts of precious metal into the European economy. This flood of silver would become the fuel for a brand new global economic system. So let's connect these last pieces. We've got a continent that's been primed by centuries of indirect trade, it's been reshaped by plague, cut off from the east, and then suddenly it's handed this unprecedented windfall of land and money. So what happens next? Well, what happens is this powerful feedback loop gets created. In the 1500s, all that American silver causes massive inflation across Europe, a price revolution. Then, this new capital finances the brutal but hugely profitable triangular trade of goods and enslaved people across the Atlantic. Finally, the vast profits, the new markets, and the raw materials from this whole system provide the essential ingredients for the Industrial Revolution to ignite in Britain. So, if we put it all together, Europe's rise wasn't some kind of miracle that just happened in a vacuum. It was a four-step process. First, it absorbed wealth and technology from more advanced civilizations. Second, it had to adapt in these really unique ways to catastrophic global shocks. Third, it expanded to seize a historic windfall of resources. And finally, that combination allowed it to dominate and build the modern world economy. Which leaves us with a final, pretty big question to think about. Does the story of the last 500 years represent some sort of predestined European miracle? Or is our modern globalized world simply the result of a long, unpredictable chain of accidents, connections, and catastrophes that just happened to break Europe's way? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.